On his birthday, my grandson looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're too poor to be family." He didn't whisper it, he didn't flinch, and no one in the room said a word to defend me. I smiled, not because I was okay, but because I needed to hold myself together just long enough to get out of there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. A week earlier, I got a phone call I never expected. My son's voice, stiff and unfamiliar, said, "Dad, we're having a party for Ethan's graduation. It's kind of a big deal. He's top of his class." I waited for the real reason he was calling. Maybe he needed help or money, but no, that was it. An invitation. I hadn't stepped foot in their house in over 6 years. Not since the last time I showed up uninvited on Christmas Eve, only to find the door locked and the lights off, even though I could see them laughing inside through the curtains. Still, I told him I'd come. After the call, I just sat there in my kitchen staring at the wall. My hands didn't stop shaking for a long time. You have to understand something. I'm not a bitter man. I raised my boy alone, worked double shifts at the plant, missed sleep, birthdays, meals, all so he could go to college, build a life I never had. And he did. Big house, big car, big everything. Meanwhile, I still live in the same one-bedroom I moved into after his mother died. The wallpaper's peeling, the kettle squeals, and the floor creaks loud enough to wake the neighbors. But I was proud of him. Still am. I wanted to look my best, even if I didn't feel it. I ironed my jacket, the one I wore to his wedding, back when I was still Dad, and not just that man who lives alone. The cuffs were fraying, the lining was coming apart at the seam, but it still smelled faintly of hope. I had saved a little over the last few months, a few dollars at a time, folded and tucked into an envelope behind my old clock. I used it to buy Ethan a gift, not something flashy, just something that mattered. A vintage wristwatch that once belonged to his great-grandfather. I had kept it all these years, cleaned it, repaired it. It ticked like new. I thought, maybe, it would mean something. I took the bus early that morning, sat by the window, watched neighborhoods pass by that looked nothing like mine, cleaner sidewalks, trimmed hedges, smiling people. When I arrived, I stood at the edge of the driveway for a moment, gift in hand, heart pounding like a drum. I thought someone might come out and wave or call my name, but the door stayed shut. Laughter echoed from inside. I knocked, and the story began. Friends, let's take a short pause. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Has something like this ever happened to you or someone you know? If this story touches your heart, please consider subscribing and sharing it. That's how you help us grow and keep telling the stories that matter. Now, let's continue. The house looked like something out of a magazine. Tall windows, marble steps. Everything was spotless, expensive, cold. A valet was parking cars out front, and I walked past him with my hands in my pockets, clutching the box with the watch inside. Nobody greeted me at the door. I turned the knob and stepped inside on my own. The warmth hit me first. Not emotional warmth, no. Just the heat from dozens of bodies inside, laughing, clinking glasses, telling stories I hadn't been invited to be part of. The air smelled like polished wood and catered food, not like home, not like family. I stood there in the entryway for a moment, taking it all in. My grandson was at the center of it all. Tall now, broad shoulders, suit sharp as a blade. He was laughing with a group of his friends. For a second I saw my boy in him, not my son, but the boy he used to be, running through the yard with grass-stained knees. That memory flickered and then died. He looked over and saw me, and everything about him changed. The smile dropped. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, not in surprise, but discomfort, like I was something he'd hoped wouldn't show up, something embarrassing he'd tried to forget. He didn't come over. My son, his father, spotted me from across the room. His glance was quick, almost mechanical. A nod, nothing more. Not even a hello, not even the effort to pretend. I walked deeper into the house. The sound of voices dipped, then rose again. I was a ghost, walking through expensive furniture and designer decorations. No one asked who I was. No one offered to take my coat. I carried the gift like a shield in front of me, hoping it would somehow protect me from the shame crawling up my spine. I saw the dining table, long covered in candles, name cards, perfect dishes, every seat taken, every seat except one, far off at the end, not near family, not near friends. I sat there. No one said anything. I watched them toast to his future. Ivy League dreams, internships at companies I couldn't even pronounce. I listened to stories about ski trips, private tutors, overseas camps. They laughed. They drank. They spoke about success as if it were the only currency of love. Not one word about his roots. Not one word about where he came from. Not a mention of the man who worked overtime for 20 years to keep the lights on, or the nights I spent fixing cars for cash when the factory laid me off. Not one. It wasn't just silence, it was erasure. I wasn't there as family. I was there as a reminder, a wrinkle in a photo, a crack in the frame. And so they ignored me, hoping maybe I'd just fade into the wallpaper and disappear. But I didn't. I stayed. I sat in that chair like a statue, heart full of noise no one could hear, watching the boy I once cradled in my arms pretend I didn't exist. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, devastatingly alone. The chair was there like it had been placed as an afterthought, at the very end of the table, near the wall, away from the warmth of the candles and the sound of laughter. Not one of those high-backed designer chairs like the rest, but a fold-up, the kind you'd use for overflow guests who were never meant to stay long. That's where I sat. I placed the gift on my lap, kept both hands on it, as if letting go would somehow let go of my purpose. I sat still, quiet, and tried not to listen. But silence, real silence, is louder than anything, and that room was screaming. They passed food around me like I wasn't there. A platter of roast stopped right before it reached my side, turned around by a hand that didn't even glance my way. Glasses clinked above my head, arms reached across me as if I were just another piece of furniture in the room. I heard one woman, I think it was my daughter-in-law's sister, say something about how some people just don't fit in anymore. The words weren't meant to be subtle. They landed like stones, sharp and heavy, and I swallowed them without flinching. There was pride in that silence. Pain too, but mostly pride. Across the table, my son laughed at something a man in a suit said, the kind of laughter I hadn't heard from him in years, not since he was a teenager, helping me patch the roof during a summer storm. That laugh used to be mine, used to belong to late-night card games and cheap pizza on the floor of our old apartment. Now it belonged to men with clean shoes and expensive watches, men who talked about mergers and bonuses and stocks while I sat in a thrifted jacket with calloused hands and a heart that still beat like a father's. I caught my grandson looking at me, just for a moment, not with hate, no, that would have been easier. It was worse than that. It was detachment, a practiced disinterest, like someone looking past a stranger on the subway. There was no warmth in his face, no recognition. I don't even think he saw the gift I held, or maybe he did, and didn't care. Voices filled the room, but none came near me. Names were called, stories told, futures celebrated, yet I sat in that cold, lonely seat, as if I were watching it all through a window. The place I used to call family was now a theater I didn't have a ticket to. A little boy bumped into my chair while running, and his mother rushed to grab him, whispering, "Watch out!" as if I were fragile, as if I'd break. They were wrong. I already had. I looked at the centerpiece in front of me. Tall flowers, elegant, hollow, and realized I hadn't spoken a single word since I entered the house. No one had noticed. No one cared. And for the first time, I wondered if the heaven remembered the man who taught my son how to tie his shoes, or that I once held the same last name with pride. That empty chair wasn't just mine. It was who I had become to them, invisible, unnecessary, forgotten. But I stayed, not out of pride anymore, just to see how far they'd go in pretending I was never part of their story at all. The night drifted on, and with every passing moment, I felt myself being slowly erased. They began sharing stories, one after another, not just about my grandson's achievements, but about their lives as a family, their adventures, their laughter, their memories. I listened in silence as they painted a world I'd never been invited into. Vacations in Europe, summers on the lake, birthday parties at country clubs with ice sculptures and live music. They spoke with ease, like a well-rehearsed chorus, their voices weaving a tapestry I didn't belong to. I watched as my son leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, smiling while his wife recounted some ski trip where Ethan broke his leg and everyone ended up laughing about it around a bonfire. I wasn't there. Of course I wasn't. I didn't even know it happened. But the way they told it, as if it were some sacred family moment, it felt like they had never even thought of calling me. Not even once. Every story felt like a closed door, and in the back of my mind, memories I'd buried began to wake. I remembered a different version of my son, the boy who used to sit on my shoulders in the grocery store, who cried himself to sleep the first night his mother didn't come home from the hospital. I remembered working double shifts just to buy him a used bicycle. I remembered stitching his school uniform by hand when we couldn't afford new ones. I remembered lying awake most nights, worrying about how I'd pay rent, while he slept peacefully in the room I gave up for him. But none of that was in their stories. None of it mattered now. Because the life I gave them, the sacrifices I made, had become a foundation they had built a mansion on, and then closed the gates behind them. I watched Ethan's friends pat him on the back, tell him how proud they were, how lucky he was, and he was lucky. But it wasn't luck, it was love, my years, my hands that bled and back that broke so he could be here, but no one in that room would have guessed. They laughed about how far they'd come as a family, how proud they were of their journey. They called it that, a journey, as if they'd walked some noble path hand in hand, earning their success together. But I knew the truth. The journey had started with a man who walked alone. Me. No one told the story of the night my son came home crying because another kid said he didn't have a real family. No one mentioned how I held him for hours and promised I'd be enough. No one remembered the days I came home with blistered hands and empty pockets, just so he wouldn't feel empty himself. I had carried the weight of 2 parents on my back. And yet as I sat there listening to them glorify their memories, it was like I had never existed, like I had been nothing more than a shadow that helped build their walls, only to be shut out once they no longer needed my shade. I stared down at the box on my lap, the old watch inside wrapped carefully in a soft cloth. The gift meant something to me. It had history, sacrifice, a legacy. But to them, it would probably just look old, just like me. I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would look over. Maybe my son would remember. Maybe Ethan would say, "Tell us about Grandpa." But they didn't. Not once. They had their version of family. Their polished, edited, gleaming version, and I didn't fit in it. I wasn't part of their memories. And that night, I realized I wasn't part of their future either. The clinking of silverware against crystal drew the room into a hush. Someone stood and raised a glass. A family friend, maybe a business partner, and spoke about legacy, achievement, hard work. It was the kind of polished speech that makes people nod without thinking, filled with carefully selected words like excellence and vision and potential. The applause that followed was automatic, rehearsed, like everything else that night. Then my grandson rose to speak. All eyes turned to him. He didn't need notes. He stood there with the casual confidence of someone who had never once had to wonder where his next meal would come from. The kind of boy raised in safety, in comfort, who never knew what it felt like to watch your father's hands tremble from exhaustion after another graveyard shift. He smiled, the charming kind practiced for cameras and college interviews, and thanked everyone for coming, thanked his parents for supporting him, thanked his mentors, thanked the school, thanked the future. And then with a laugh, a careless kind of laugh, that only the young and certain can afford, he said it. Family isn't really about blood anymore, right? It's about who you grow with, who helps you succeed. A few chuckles. Someone raised their glass again in agreement. "To success!" someone shouted. The words hung in the air like smoke, curling into my chest. choking me from the inside out. I didn't look at him. I didn't look at anyone. I just reached for the glass of water in front of me, lifted it with steady hands, and took a long sip, swallowed hard. Not just the water, the pain, the humiliation, the quiet realization that I had just been erased in a single sentence. Not about blood. I thought of the nights I came home soaked through with rain, carrying groceries in torn bags because I didn't have a car. I thought of the Christmas mornings I stayed up wrapping toys from discount stores so my boy wouldn't feel poor. I thought of the day I sold my wedding ring to cover his college prep fees. Not about blood. I looked down at my hands, hands that had built shelves and patched walls, and held my son's head when he cried after his first heartbreak. Hands that never hit, never abandoned, never turned away, and yet somehow they were not enough. He called it growth. I called it betrayal. They applauded his words. They smiled at how clever he was, how progressive, how modern. I sat among them with a straight back and a heavy heart. No one noticed the storm gathering behind my eyes, because I had come there hoping for a bridge, even just a small one, a handshake, a kind word, a moment of connection, but instead I was handed a verdict. He had drawn a line, and I was on the wrong side of it. I looked at my son then, the man I had once raised from a boy. He didn't flinch, didn't shift in his seat. He just nodded along with the crowd, a quiet, complicit smile on his face. It hurt more than words can carry, because I hadn't lost just a grandson that night. I had lost the last thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, love and memory and sacrifice still meant something in this family. And so I lifted my glass once more, silent, invisible, and drank to the truth. The night air was cooler out on the patio, a sharp contrast to the stifling warmth inside. I stepped through the sliding doors and felt the tension in my shoulders loosen just a fraction. The moonlight spilled across the stone floor in ribbons, and tiny lanterns glowed like fireflies along the railing. I found Ethan leaning against the low wall, shoulders squared, chin up, exactly like his father had stood when he was a boy wanting to prove he didn't need me. I held out the small velvet-lined box without a word. Inside lay the wristwatch, its silver case dulled by age and polished lovingly until it gleamed again. His great-grandfather wore it to work every day, through wars, recessions, and the birth of a family. Every scratch was a memory. I saw curiosity flicker in Ethan's eyes as he opened the box. For a moment, I thought he might feel something. The weight of history, the warmth of legacy. The night held its breath. He lifted the watch, turned it over in his hand, and there was no awe in his face, no gratitude, only cold appraisal. I said softly, "It meant everything to him. It's yours now if you'll have it." He looked at me then, the gathered lantern light dancing in his eyes like distant stars. He studied my worn jacket, the way my hands trembled slightly as I held the box. He saw the years etched into my face, the quiet pride mixed with fear, and still he spoke. "You're too poor to be family," he said. No laughter this time, no need. The words were delivered like a scalpel, precise, effortless, devastating. My chest tightened. The sound of his voice was lost beneath the pounding of my own heart. A single echo. Poor family. I closed the box with deliberate calm, feeling each click of the latch like a verdict. I nodded once, the only movement I could muster, and turned away. The moonlight receded as I stepped back into the house, back into the silence where I no longer belonged. The watch stayed with me in my pocket, its ticking a reminder that time moves forward, even when hearts break, and I walked on. I paused in the hallway, the soft carpet muffling my footsteps as I stood just beyond the patio door. Behind me, a world where my presence was an inconvenience, where my sacrifices were footnotes in someone else's script. My heart felt like shattered glass, each jagged fragment a memory of laughter I'd never hear again, of bedtime stories told by my own voice, of scraped knees I had soothed. I gave Ethan a steady nod, the dignified gesture of a man who has nothing left to prove, but everything to lose. My eyes met his only for a moment, long enough to send across all the words I couldn't speak. I loved you. I gave you everything. I'm still here. But he looked away, the muscle in his jaw tightening as if to brace against remorse. The light in the hallway flared bright as I passed under a chandelier, its crystals tinkling like distant bells. I felt the warmth of the house recede behind me, each step carrying me farther from the man I used to be, the man they once called Dad, Grandpa, family. My jacket felt heavier, weighed down by the watch in my pocket and the silence in my soul. I didn't look back. My son stood at the threshold, his hand hovering near mine as if he might reach out, then drop. He didn't follow. His absence echoed louder than any words could. I walked through the front door into the night, the cool air brushing my face like truth. And in that moment, I understood that walking away wasn't defeat. It was the final act of love I could give, refusing to beg for a place at a table that had long forgotten my name. The streetlights were halos in the mist, each one flickering as if uncertain whether to guide me or warn me away. My vision clouded with tears I refused to wipe, because wiping them felt like admitting defeat. The pavement beneath my feet was uneven, a patchwork of old memories and fresh heartbreak. Each step carried the weight of decades. The nights I skipped meals so my son could eat, sliding my plate aside while he finished every bite. The mornings I rose before dawn to clock in at the factory, aching bones propelling me through another shift so he could have textbooks and new shoes. The weekends I spent scrubbing floors and painting walls to save enough for a down payment on the little home he proudly shows off now. I passed the corner where I'd once comforted him after a bad dream, kneeling in the gutter as rain soaked my coat, humming an old lullaby until his sobs stilled. I rounded the block where he learned to ride his bike, no training wheels, and I chased him down the sidewalk, lunged, caught him by the collar, and bore the bruises on my forearm as badges of love. And I felt the hollow ache in my chest, realizing those moments built him, but did not build a bridge back to me. Cars slid by, tinted windows reflecting back a stranger's face, eyes red and raw. The neon sign of a closed corner store glowed with indifference. I slowed, remembering how I once stood in line here, counting out coins to buy him candy on special days, holidays, first days of school, times when I scraped every cent together just to see his smile. Now the coins in my pocket felt heavy with regret. I reached the front gate of my own front stoop, a modest porch with creaking boards, paint peeling like layers of my own resilience. I sat on the top step and exhaled, as though breathing out years of hope and fear. The watch lay in my jacket pocket, ticking quietly, a heartbeat of another life that seemed as distant as the stars above. Alone under the dim porch light, I let the tears fall, not in shame but in release. The walk home had carried me through memories of sacrifice and love unacknowledged, but it had also brought me back to where I belonged, in the simplicity of my own solitude, where I could breathe freely again, unburdened by their cold rejection. The night wrapped around me like a cloak, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace with the man I still was. I flicked on the bedside lamp and sat on the edge of the mattress, the night's darkness still clinging to the corners of the room. My hand trembled as I opened the top drawer of my old dresser, its wood scarred by years of use, like the lines etched on my own face. There, beneath a tangle of receipts and yellowed photographs, lay the envelope I'd never sent. Its paper was soft with age, edges curled, the ink slightly faded but still legible. I held it gently, as though touching something alive, and remembered the day I wrote it. My grandson was turning 10, a bright-eyed boy with scraped knees and endless questions. I'd stayed up late that night, pulling sentences from the deepest wells of my heart. I wrote about my dreams for him, that he'd chase his passions without fear, that he'd know kindness before ambition, that he'd always remember where he came from. I spoke of pride so fierce it hurt, of a love that would never fade no matter what distance or silence came between us. I had folded the letter, sealed it with a trembling hand, and then without another thought, placed it in this drawer, where it rotted, unread, forgotten by both of us. I slit the envelope open one last time and read the words aloud to the empty room. Each line carried echoes of my younger self, hopeful and unbeaten. I felt gratitude for those moments, for the innocence of that boy and the fierce love that drove me to write. But I also felt grief for the letter's silence, for every unspoken word that had drifted into nothingness. Tears welled in my eyes as I crumpled the paper and dropped it into the metal wastebasket by the dresser. The first flame curled around the edge of the envelope, turning my hopes into ash. I watched the fire consume my words, watched my own dreams for him curl into smoke. The heat stung my face, but I did not look away. When the last piece of paper fell, glowing ember to cold ash, something in me shifted. I felt the finality of that chapter, the letters burning a release, a recognition that some expressions of love are meant only for the heart that writes them, not the hands that hold them. I stood in the sudden quiet, breathing deeply as the lamp's soft glow pooled around me. The drawer was empty now, but I felt lighter, freed from memories that no longer served me. Outside, the world waited, its possibilities untouched by rejection. And as the embers cooled, I understood that love remains, even when its words turn to ash. The knock came just as the sky was shifting from bruised purple to midnight blue. I was in my armchair, staring at nothing, the emptiness of the room settling around me like dust, when the sound echoed through the quiet. I set aside the book I'd been pretending to read and opened the door to find Tommy, Mr. Whitaker's boy, hesitating on the stoop. He must have seen how hollow my eyes were these past days, how I barely left the house. "Mr. Harris," he said softly, voice cracking with teenage concern, "you okay?" His question landed like a lifeline. I swallowed whatever I'd been about to say, some feeble, "I'm fine," the automatic lie, and instead stepped aside. "Come in, son." He walked into my living room with the careful caution of someone walking on cracked ice. I offered him a seat on the worn couch, the springs creaking under his weight. He sat, knees drawn up, and waited. I didn't need to ask why he came. The weight of my own sorrow filled the air between us. For a moment, we just existed in the same space, two souls on opposite sides of life's path. Then he spoke. He told me about school, how he struggled in math, how the kids at his new school whispered about his family's odd neighbor who never smiled. He admitted he'd seen me at the graduation party, standing alone on the patio, wrapping my hands around that old watch. He said he wondered why no one came after me. I listened. No interruption, no judgment, just silence punctuated by the steady ticking of the mantel clock. And with each word he shared, a stutter of insecurity, a burst of teenage bravado, the honest fear in his eyes, I felt something in me thaw. My story had broken me open, and here was someone brave enough to step inside. We talked until the hallway clock chimed 10, voices low enough not to disturb the neighbors. He lingered at the doorway, brushing a lock of hair from his brow. "Can I come by again?" he asked, as if offering to light a candle in a dark room. "Any time," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. And come by he did. Each evening, Tommy appeared at my door like a promise, homework in hand, questions on his tongue, kindness in his heart. Sometimes we talked about his problems. Other times I shared stories of my son's childhood, of scraped knees and starry nights, of the boy who once clung to my leg and begged me to stay. He listened without interruption, eyes wide with respect. In those visits, I found something I thought I'd lost: purpose. My living room became a haven for his worries and my memories. The loneliness retreated, replaced by warm conversation and soft laughter. And though my family had shut me out, a new bond was forming, one built not on blood but on genuine care, on the simple act of showing up. Each night, as I closed the door behind him, I felt a measure of peace I hadn't known in years. The watch still ticked softly on the mantel, but it no longer hurt me. Instead, it reminded me that time moves on, and that sometimes the unexpected visitor brings the healing we never knew we needed. The mornings after became our sacred hours, Tommy arriving before school, backpack slung over one shoulder, ready to tackle the small projects I'd once managed alone. We'd paint the fence together, my brushstrokes deliberate and steady, his eager and new, our laughter rising each time I teased him about getting paint on his sneakers. Or we'd level the garden bed, shovels in hand, dirt under our nails, as I showed him how to read the soil, how to know when it was ready for seeds. He soaked up every lesson like a sponge, eyes bright with curiosity that my grandson's indifference had never sparked. In the afternoons, when the sun dipped low, we drifted inside and music became our refuge. I dusted off my old guitar, strings still holding their tune, and played chords I hadn't touched in years. Tommy learned the basics quickly: gentle finger placement, the way to strum for rhythm, the pause between chords that creates beauty. We talked about why lyrics matter, how a simple melody can carry a lifetime of emotion. He confessed he'd never felt understood by adults before, that they talked down to him or overlooked him. But with me, his questions were invitations, not interruptions. As the days folded into weeks, our bond deepened. He asked about choices, big ones and small, and I told him about the crossroads I'd faced, leaving school to support my family, saying no to easier paths, and saying yes to responsibility. He listened, nodding as if each word was a stepping stone he could use one day. I shared stories of my own father, his stern guidance, his flawed humanity, and I saw empathy bloom in Tommy's gaze. He began helping not just with chores, but with cooking too, measuring flour for pancakes on Saturday mornings, whisking eggs, and learning that food shared is a language of love. There were moments when he would pause mid-sentence and say, "Thank you, Mr. Harris," as though realizing for the first time that someone cared deeply about his growth. And I would feel a swell of pride, the same pride I'd once felt with my own son, all over again. No walls separated us, just two generations united by respect and genuine affection. My house, once quiet and weighed down by sorrow, now hummed with activity. Paint cans lined the porch, music sheets strewn across the coffee table, the scent of fresh herbs in pots by the window. I thought I'd given my best years to a family that no longer saw me, but in teaching Tommy, I discovered new purpose. He respected me not for my status or my bank account, but for my stories, my skills, and the steady kindness I offered. In those moments, I understood that family isn't defined by blood alone. It's built by showing up, day after day, in acts of service, in lessons shared, in laughter echoing through the halls. And as I watched Tommy pack up his things each evening, I knew that this bond, forged in paint and dirt and music, would stand the test of time, stronger than any grand celebration could ever hope to be. I woke to the sharp scent of burnt toast and the humming refrigerator, the morning light slanting through the kitchen window. I'd been up before dawn, as always, fixing us a simple breakfast: 2 eggs, toast, coffee. But as I reached for the coffee pot, the room tilted, the edges of the counter sliding away like waves. My vision tunneled, my legs gave out. I crumpled to the floor without a sound. When I came to, there was a blur of white walls and frantic voices. Tommy knelt beside me, his face pale with fear. His hand gripped mine, warm and steady. "Mr. Harris, stay with me," he whispered, pressing gently on my arm as if I were his own father. He'd torn a strip of his sleeve to staunch the trickle of blood from my forehead, where I'd struck it on the cabinet door. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper. He must have called the ambulance. I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder, then a rush of paramedics, a flurry of clipped words: "High blood pressure, possible stroke, we need to move him now." They lifted me onto a stretcher, straps clicking, machines beeping. Tommy followed the ambulance to the hospital in his father's car, riding shotgun, gripping the seat as though it could anchor him against his own fear. Hours later, I lay in a crisp, white hospital bed, monitors tracking my fragile pulse. The doctor's face was kind but serious. Your lucky young Tommy acted so quickly, he said. Your blood pressure was dangerously high. You need rest and care. Lots of it. He glanced at the paperwork on the bedside table. Emergency contact, my son's name at the top, then my grandson's. The doctor tapped the chart. We tried calling them, but no one answered. His eyes met mine, apologetic. If you need to update contacts, I nodded, unable to speak past the dry ache in my throat. The absence of their calls felt heavier than any medical emergency. I lay there, realizing that the ties of blood hadn't held. My own family had left me lying on the floor to be found by a teenager they barely knew. Tommy sat beside me in a hard plastic chair, his eyes red-rimmed but resolute. He clasped my hand and didn't let go. All day he stayed, texting his mother only to ask if she wanted a cup of coffee, never mentioning the real reason he was there. He read to me from a worn copy of a book we'd started weeks ago, passages about hope, about courage. I drifted between sleep and wakefulness, his voice like a lighthouse cutting through my fear. That night, as the ward grew quiet, the overhead lights dimmed, I realized that family, real family, is not defined by a shared last name on a form. It's forged in acts of compassion, in loyalty when others turn away. In the collapse of my body, my old world had crumbled. Yet in its ruins, a new bond had proven stronger than blood. And as I drifted to sleep, Tommy's steady hand in mine, I felt a profound gratitude. Even when the ones who should have come didn't, I was not alone. The morning of the court date dawned gray and still, as though the world itself held its breath. I had lain awake for hours, not from nerves, but from a strange calm that comes with knowing you've done what you must. Years ago, when my son was still a boy and my pockets barely held enough for groceries, I'd scraped together every penny to buy a small parcel of land just beyond town. I placed it in Ethan's name, a humble future gift, a sliver of earth that might one day belong to him. I never told anyone. I didn't need praise. I believed in quiet love. But after the party, after the words that cut deeper than any blade, I realized that gift, meant to tie us together, had become yet another chain. So I went to the courthouse, pages of paperwork in hand, and filed a simple petition: revoke the deed. The act felt like returning a ring, letting go of dreams I had once pinned on a boy who no longer saw me as family. When I arrived at the courthouse that morning, the marble steps gleamed cold under my shoes. My briefcase felt light, almost empty. I walked into the courtroom and took my seat at the plaintiff's table. The bailiff announced the case, and I saw them, my son, my daughter-in-law, and even Ethan, slip into seats just behind the defense table. Their faces were masks of curiosity, guilt, and something I almost felt sorry for: regret. The judge, a woman with kind eyes and a voice that carried both authority and empathy, reviewed the papers. "Mr. Harris," she said, "this appears straightforward. You originally gifted this parcel to your grandson. Now you wish to reclaim it. Is that correct?" I met her gaze and nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I believe a gift should be given freely, but I've been shown it was never wanted. I watched their faces tighten. Ethan shifted in his seat, eyes flickering with discomfort. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Harris, do you wish any compensation, or is the revocation absolute?" "My wish," I said softly, "is simply to release myself from obligations to a family that no longer values me. No compensation necessary." My words hung in the air, heavy with years of unspoken sorrow and pride. There was a brief pause, then the judge nodded and signed the order. "The deed is hereby revoked," she declared, rapping her gavel. "Court is adjourned." A murmur rippled through the room. My son rose slowly, as if waking from a dream. He stared at me, his father, the man who taught him right from wrong, then at the empty space on the papers where my signature glowed like a vindication. Ethan stood too, but he found no words. For the first time, he seemed truly at a loss. My daughter-in-law bit her lip, and I felt no triumph in their reaction. There was only the solemn finality of a gift returned, of a bond severed, and of truth spoken in a court of law rather than a dining room. I collected my briefcase and rose, shoulders straight, heart clearer than it had been in years. As I passed them, I saw in their eyes the recognition of what they had lost, something that could never be given back. But I did not look away. I walked past the defense table, out of the courtroom, and into the bright, cold light of that spring morning. Outside, the sky cracked open with gentle sunlight. I breathed in the fresh air and felt something I hadn't felt in a long while. Release. I had reclaimed not just land, but my dignity and my peace. And though my family had finally shown up to witness it, they arrived too late to understand that the most precious gift I ever gave them was love. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go. The courtroom fell silent as the judge leaned back, her robes folding around her like a mantle of impartial wisdom. She closed the file, eyes drifting from me to the rows behind me where my son and grandson sat, tension etched on their faces. Then she spoke, her voice clear and warm, carrying more weight than any gavel stroke. "This man wasn't abandoned by blood," she said, pausing so each word could settle. "He was betrayed by ego." A murmur rippled through the room as though the walls themselves shuddered at the truth. Justice isn't only legal, it's moral. And today morality demands that we acknowledge the pain of a father whose only crime was to love too deeply and to give too much. My pulse slowed as her words sank in. I felt a strange lightness, as if the heavy stones of regret were rolling off my shoulders, one by one. Behind me, I heard the soft gasp of my daughter-in-law and a stifled sob from somewhere near the back. Ethan's face, once so guarded, went slack. For the first time since that cruel whisper on the patio, I saw a flicker of genuine remorse in his eyes. The judge's pen scratched across the document. "By law, the deed is returned to Mr. Harris, but by conscience let this verdict serve as a reminder. Love cannot be measured in titles or fortunes. It thrives only when ego steps aside." She rapped her gavel once, firm, final. And with that, the legal battle ended. But something far more profound had shifted. My grandson sat speechless, shoulders trembling ever so slightly. I could almost see the walls he had built around his heart beginning to crack. My son's jaw tightened as if he struggled between pride and guilt. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the hushed air. Outside, I could imagine the world moving on, unaware of the quiet revolution that had transpired here. One born not of statutes, but of truth. In that stillness, I forgave them again. Forgave their blindness, their ambition, their fear. Not for their sake, but for mine. For every burdened step I'd taken toward this moment, I gave myself permission to heal. When I opened my eyes, the court was clearing. My grandson remained seated, frozen in place. I stood, feeling the weight of history in the soles of my shoes, but the lift of relief in my chest. I walked past him slowly, and in the briefest moment, our eyes met. I didn't need words. The echo of the judge's truth between us said more than anything I could ever speak. And as I stepped out of that courtroom into the pale daylight, I carried with me a new understanding. True justice honors not only the law, but the dignity of the heart, and sometimes that is the greatest victory of all. When I stepped through the courthouse doors, the spring air felt like a baptism, soft and alive, carrying the scent of blooming flowers and new beginnings. I had expected nothing, but then I heard his voice behind me, unsteady, laced with regret. "Grandpa, I'm sorry." He stood on the marble steps, the afternoon sun casting his shadow, long and thin. His voice cracked, as though the words had traveled a great distance to reach me. I turned slowly, the weight of everything we'd lost and everything I'd reclaimed settling into the space between us. His eyes, usually so guarded, glistened with unshed tears. In that moment, I saw the boy who once held my finger and the young man who broke my heart. I felt the pull of love and pain twisting together in my chest. I paused, searching his face for truth, for sincerity. My heart thundered in my ears, but my voice stayed calm. I forgive you, I said, each word deliberate and soft, but I no longer wait for you. The words fell like petals onto cold stone. He swallowed as though trying to catch them, but they slipped away. My forgiveness was a gift he could carry forward. My resolve not to return to that seat of rejection was my promise to myself. He opened his mouth, then closed it, uncertain. I saw the hope flicker, hope that maybe I would step back, hope that perhaps blood still meant something, but I did not move. I straightened my shoulders and took a step toward the street. My grandson watched me go, his apology undressed of expectation, hanging in the air like possibility. Behind me, the courthouse faded into the distance. Before me, the wide world shimmered with promise I had nearly forgotten. I walked on, through the sunlight and the lilac-scented breeze, feeling every step affirm my worth. Not broken, not defeated, free. And in that freedom, I found the greatest redemption, the knowledge that love given without condition can heal the giver first.